I'm Dylan Ratigan. I've interviewed nearly every CEO and most world leaders during the past 25 years. And now I'm bootstrapping. I'm turning my attention to the new CEOs and the irrepressible entrepreneurs leading the next generation of innovation in the world. Welcome back to Tasty Live. I am Dylan Ratigan. Time for another episode of Bootstrapping. Howard Tolman here today with a new book called Words of Wisdom. Howard, you age yourself, but you do it in a way that a wise man should. But all joking aside, you claim that this is thought fragments and insights that go back to the 1960s, from early 1960s to today, shall we say?
Yeah.
What inspired you to put this together in the first place?
You know, it's a habit I've had forever. Starting when I was in college. Just when I would see or find a phrase or I'd write something, I sort of archived it. And it got to the point where I started to fold a lot of these statements into speeches I was giving and presentations and articles I was writing. And people were forever saying, I couldn't write down all the things on your PowerPoint, or I couldn't catch up with everything. And I said, well, I'll put them all in a book and just push it out there. And so that's what happened.
And so how do you prioritize? When you assemble a book?
Beauty.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of this book. So my first book was called You Can't Win a Race with Your Mouth. And that was the first 300 columns that I've written for my weekly Inc. magazine column. So that was easy. That was just chronological. This is alphabetical only because it gives me a way to plug the thing in. And when people ask me, is it indexed or is there a way of going through it? All I say is take a yellow magic marker, go into the bathroom, pick a letter and enjoy yourself, because every page has something that people will want to sort of keep in mind, I think. But there's no rhyme or reason to the order other than alphabetical.
And so do you view this as a philosophical? Is this insights on living, or is this insights on is it a business book or is it a living book?
It's both. It's a living book. It's a literary book. It's a business book. It's a little bit of everything. In fact, one of the things that we're working on right now that you'll sort of enjoy is we've folded it into our chat bot. And so now you can go to my blog and you can ask me a question through the chat bot, and it will dig through all this stuff and give you an answer. And we're building a product that'll give everybody a personalized sort of a selfie bot that will let them take their email, take anything they've written, take stuff that's of interest to them, throw it into a content base that it doesn't go worldwide, but is basically based on their information. So for me, it works out perfect. We folded in 460 Inc. articles plus the contents of this book. And it's pretty interesting. I'm afraid that if you don't limit the content database to something that you control, then the latest ones just go out and grab everything. And frankly, already it's clear that they're grabbing stuff that chatbots are writing. And so you don't know anything about the sourcing now, because it's like third and fourth generation of this information.
It's sourcing itself, basically, or it's sourcing prior iterations of itself, if nothing else.
Yeah. So I think we're going to see companies that think of this as a resource are going to get over pretty quickly, it's got all the information in the world, and use it more as a information retrieval system within their own world so that they can control what's coming back.
And have you been able to look at the nature of the questions when people say when people ask what would Howard say? Do you have any visibility as to what questions people are most interested in getting Howard to answer?
Sure.
In other words, what would Howard have for lunch, or would Howard buy this company, or I'd be interested where the point, if you have any visibility as to the demand Howard's point of view on different subjects.
Yeah, well, Well, first of all, the nature of the system is that all the prompts are tracked. And, one of the great jobs in the future is going to be being a prompt engineer, because the trick is not knowing that the information is there. The trick is, how do you phrase the questions, and then how do you iterate the questions? So this system absolutely archives the progress of the various questions. So, you might say, what does Howard think about working from home? What are the upsides and the downsides? That's something I wrote about, today in ink. And then they'll shape the question, and they'll ask subsequent questions, and they'll continue to go down and try and refine the answer. And the system is pretty smart about knowing what was in the prior questions. That's been one of the hardest things with respect to voice technology, has been to try and understand the context of the prior conversation in order to make your answer relevant and to sort of build off of it. It's much easier when it's in text, for a lot of different reasons. But it's been very interesting, and frankly, I think that there's a perfectly good and logical reason for Tom to put one of these together, and for all of the talent to spin off the same kind of thing. I mean, it's just a question of, what do you do for the content base. And frankly, we're getting pretty close to where you could say, here's 100 shows, and go listen to these shows, or listen to the transcripts from these shows and extract from there. So all that's happening.
So I have a question for Howard himself, which may not give me as good of an answer as the chatbot would, because it won't have the collective Howard. But I'll take the biologically flawed version because I've got it, which is, how on earth can the world's most innovative, wealthiest, and most powerful country, being the United States, have such an atrocious management politically? How can the leadership of the world's most powerful and wealthiest country be so objectively and clearly incompetent across the board?
So my answer for the last 15 or 20 years has been the same. It's always been the same, and that is, very simply, who would want the job? I mean, it used to be 20 years ago, there was a thing called the $1 a year man, and some of the most talented people in our country would volunteer for government service. And so they would be advisors to the leadership, or they would help in the process. These days, if you volunteer for this kind of a position and you go before the Senate or Congress for approval, some schmuck will, introduce a photo of you and a donkey, and you'll spend the next 2 years of your career saying you were just friends. So we've made it a horrible position, and we've ended up with the people that are still interested in that, which it should be almost a disqualification if you want these jobs. And by the way, if you look at the Chicago mayoral situation, everybody who ultimately we thought might have been somebody that knew what they were doing said, I don't want that job. You have no control over the police. You have no control over the schools. I mean, who would want that job? It's completely thankless, and it's an impossible job to begin with. So we ended up with the leaders that we deserve, because we have so devalued those positions that it's embarrassing. And I think the most recent columns on the debt ceiling thing, which hopefully will be over tonight or tomorrow, have said, the net effect of that entire ugly 3-week or 3-month process has been to embarrass the United States in front of the whole world, and end up with stuff that two guys could have gone into a room and agreed upon in the ordinary course of business, because it was a little this and a little that. And that's the nature of how these things ultimately end up. They could have done this without any of the craziness and any of the angst that they caused to millions of people, and all the disruptions in our reputation internationally. We ended up here because we don't have the kind of leadership and the kind of talent and that we should have in these positions. But look, all you have to do is watch a congressional hearing, These latest hearings where these people don't even understand what the internet is, and have them pontificating about stuff that they don't have the slightest clue. And then you have the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is absolutely intent. I mean, yesterday or the day before was the second of these giant rulings. They intend to basically defang or disable all of the regulatory agencies, and the regulatory agencies were sort of the last place where reasonably competent scientific people and experts resided. I mean, they may have overreached. I understand some of the regulatory stuff has been crazy over the years, but at least they had their hearts in the right place. I mean, when you talk about clean water, I understand that there's lobbyists who'd rather have these big corporations that they represent continue to pollute Lake Michigan, but I'd like to have somebody on our side saying, no, if our kids are going to swim in this, we just assume they not be irradiated or poisoned when they're doing that, and so that's where we're at.
Are you surprised at the relative stability and prosperity of the United States in the context of such obviously incompetent political leadership across the board?
With the exception of the tech sector, what I would say is that most people running competently businesses are perfectly happy to have Congress ending up doing nothing. Okay. In other words, that's probably the best we can hope for, is they'll do no harm because they basically won't do anything other than this performative crap. But the problem is the Supreme Court has now taken it upon themselves to be regulating things that they basically have no business or sort of inserting themselves into. And we're going to have years of this because the thing that Trump accomplished more than anything else, and not just Trump, but principally Trump, was to have several hundred of these morons with no judicial or background in the real law now sitting as federal judges at the district court level. And these people are going to make our lives miserable for the next several years, at least, because they're there for the duration. And, you have this crazy guy in Texas who enjoins, how some local district judge in Texas can enjoin the entire United States. I've never understood, and it's just crazy. But that's what we're dealing with. We have super radical, sort of MAGA judges, and we're gonna get a ruling every day, and then God knows what it's going to be like when we roll into the election cycle. Because the one thing they learned the last time was that elections are time sensitive, and if you do all your disruption on election day, there is no legal recourse, because by the time you get to court and the court decides anything, the election is over. I mean, this is sort of the Al Gore, learning from way back when. And I'm afraid that that's what we're teeing up. We're teeing up situations where there'll be no restraints or no limitations on how people can try to suppress and interfere with the votes as we roll into the 2024 election. And there'll be no legal recourse because it'll all be after the fact. So, in fact, if you look at Succession, I don't know if you watched the finale, but I mean, the thing they didn't really resolve is what's going on in Wisconsin, where 100,000 votes allegedly got burned up, and the theory of those would have been they would have elected the other guy. So this is the real world situation that we're facing, and it's pretty harrowing.
Do you have reason for optimism? My reason for optimism really resides in the culture, in the resilience of small groups, whether it's small groups in a company, small groups in a community, in a town, small groups in a hospital. That small groups are actually extremely capable when they're passionate and well organized, much more capable than I think people comprehend. Shifting over to your recent column about work from home, which I know is it's a debate that's actually diminished in its volume, if only because it's been, it's going to be whatever it is, and each company is different and la la la. But one of the things that you spoke to that I think I certainly agree with is that the greatest damage is done to the youngest and to the people in the first third of their careers, whose primary benefit is the interaction with, whether it's mentorship, whether it's behavior modeling, whether it's team, like whatever. There's so many things that happen that are either tangible or intangible, but only exist by virtue of whether the pressure cooker of a deadline, the proximity of a group in a task.
Totally agree with you. And that's another reason why I'm not optimistic as much as I used to be, because those two generations, the next generation coming up and the kids just leaving college, the kids leaving college have not had a college education. They've been on pause for 2 years, but they're still being graduated. So you talk about social promotion. 5 years ago, companies were telling me they're having to retrain their basic employees who are college graduates on how to read, write, and spell. Okay. It's probably going to be 100 times worse now because they weren't even in school for several years. But the generation, the last 2 years, Boston Consulting Group, I don't know, they brought in 300 new, associates or something. They haven't been in the office for 2 years, And so the thought that they're going to somehow by osmosis receive the culture is insane. I don't know what we're going to do. And the point of the article was that's absolutely critical. And by the way, we don't even understand how much you learn at the water cooler. We don't even understand how company communication and culture is spread. And to think that you can write down a list and do it over Zoom is insane. It's just insane. What sacrifices are we willing to make in order to get the talent? And then what flexibility are we going to give the talent in terms of where they work?
The thing that I'll leave it on the last question with, what makes you the most optimistic about America today?
I think that I'm most optimistic that we have gotten rid of the Lone Ranger. I think we basically have taught the world, and it's what you said before about small groups, that nobody does anything by themselves anymore. The myth of Steve Jobs or the myth of the Lone Ranger or whatever, everything is team-based. And the colleges, the MBA programs are all shifting toward this. So, I'm a little optimistic in the fact that we understand that the only way we're going to succeed is together. And maybe that'll grow out of successes in business and expand backwards into the culture, because right now the culture couldn't be more, antagonistic and splintered. And that's an important message. And I think we're finally getting that across.
Howard, it's always a pleasure. Congrats on the book.
Good.
Words of Wisdom. Howard Tolman. This is Tasty Live. This is Bootstrapping. He's Howard. I'm Dylan Ratigan, and there's more coming up right after this.